Hey, it's Zax and Jimfro from Ready Check Pull. We got to test the last boss of the first raid in Shadowlands, so we're here to break it down for you real quick. The full guide will be out later on, but for now, here's a little preview.
We finally made it to Sire Denathrius. Let's jump right in. At the start of the fight, everybody gets 5 stacks of a permanent debuff, and the goal of phase 1 is for everyone to remove at least 3 of the stacks by the end of the phase when the boss gets to 70% health. You remove the stacks by getting hit by the boss's frontal cast. Each frontal removes a stack from everyone it hits, and it also spawns an ad nearby for every stack it removes. These ads channel damage onto the raid, which can get out of control if you have too many up at once. The boss has another ability that does damage to the raid based on how many players have the same number of stacks. So you'll most likely end up splitting your raid in half and alternating which half gets hit by the frontal so that at least half of the raid has a different number of stacks when this ability is cast. Also, after each frontal, 2 images of the boss will spawn and mark 2 random players, charging to them after a few seconds. These charges need to be soaked by the rest of the raid to reduce the damage on the marked players. The soakers just have to stay out of the circle of each marked player and avoid soaking both charges at the same time. This always happens right after a bunch of ads spawn, so it can get a little hard to see what's going on. And the last thing for this phase, you have a strict time limit on how long you have to get rid of your stacks. This is because the sword in the middle of the room will occasionally cast this big cone that covers a third of the room in red stuff that makes players unhealable. So ideally, you'll get the boss to 70% after everyone has removed 3 stacks, but before the third cone happens that leaves you with nowhere to go. At 70%, the boss starts a little intermission where he teleports to the middle of the room and knocks everyone to the edge of the room. Everyone has to run towards the boss and make it inside the circle around him to survive the transition to phase 2. The hard part is that you're silenced after you get knocked back, and you're slowed by 20% for each stack of the debuff you still have. If you manage to remove 3 stacks, you'll make it to the boss just in time, but otherwise you'll be too slow and be killed on the way to phase 2. Some classes can probably cheese this, so we'll keep an eye out on that for the full guide. In phase 2, you fight Denathrius and his floating sword while dealing with the occasional waves of ads. The goal of the phase is to get Denathrius to 40% health with no ads alive so that you can start phase 3 safely. It's also worth noting that any damage to the sword is copied onto Denathrius, so it's definitely worth putting damage into. The ads spawn in waves of 4, and 2 of them are always on separate platforms, so ranged DPS will have to focus those ones down. All they do is channel a dot onto the raid, so nothing crazy, you just don't want them up when you go into phase 3. The boss's frontal turns into a pretty basic taunt swap mechanic for the tanks, but you can also aim it at the ads to make them take extra damage. The boss also gains an ability that pulls everyone to him and then explodes for fall off damage after a few seconds. You can just run away from the explosion, but if you want to get fancy, you can run through a nearby mirror that will instantly teleport you to the opposite side of the room. Then you just take the mirror again to get back. Easy. The sword casts abilities now too, one of them being a basic taunt swap debuff on the tank. But it'll also mark random players and then charge to each of them, hitting anyone along the way. Not a huge deal, you just have to move to a good spot while everyone else stays out of the way. And the final thing in this phase is probably the coolest looking mechanic I've ever seen in this game. These giant red swords spawn all over the place and then start slicing through the platform. Yeah, it's absolutely insane, but it's actually pretty easy to dodge. Phase 3. Now at 40%, Denathrius disables the mirrors and blocks off the edges of the platform. He wields the sword himself and no more ads spawn, so it's back to just him. And you have to kill him real quick, because he'll occasionally cast the same third of the room cone as in phase 1, eventually leaving you with nowhere to go. He still does the pull everyone to him and then explode thing, and the big sword still occasionally slices through the room, and there's also still a taunt swap for the tanks. But now he has 2 new mechanics. One of them does a ton of damage to the tank and knocks everyone away from him. And the other one is a circle debuff on a random player that spawns an orb after a couple seconds. The orb will explode on the entire raid for a ton of damage after a few seconds, but the explosion can be reduced by players soaking the orbs in that time. This last phase shouldn't actually be that difficult to handle with the right strategy, but it's definitely going to be a tough DPS check. I effing love this fight. From phase 1 all the way to the boss dying, I think this fight is going to go down as one of the best fights in the last few expansions. I honestly can't wait to fight him.
Yeah, this boss is nuts. And I like that you're fighting Denathrius himself the whole way through. There's no ads only phase or anything. And as far as the mechanics go, it's actually giving me Black Hand and Argus vibes, which were 2 amazing final bosses. Not to mention, there's even a bit of a secret phase for Mythic at the end. You apparently have to go through a warped mirror at some point, and there's no telling what's going to be on the other side. I cannot wait to see that.
Thank you so much for checking out this guide preview of Sire Denathrius. We honestly can't thank our Patreons and subscribers enough. You literally are the reason why we can make these guides. We also have some pretty big plans and hopefully a few surprises for the full boss guides coming out soon. Links to our Discord and everything else in the description. Love you all. Peace.